to Cowboys insider Mickey Spagnola. This is Silver Star Nation Interactive.
Welcome in, Cowboys fans, for a special edition of our Silver Star Nation Interactive. I'm Wes Moore. We have Mickey Spagnola at the Star in Frisco. We weren't scheduled to do one today, but the Cowboys get their new head coach, Mike McCarthy. The announcement came this afternoon, and we will hear from him tomorrow at 3. So we thought, why not? Let's get Mickey on here and talk about Mike McCarthy. You can jump in. Just go to Twitter, use the hashtag #AskMickey, and we'll pass along your question to Mickey Spagnola. Mickey, let me start. Mike McCarthy tomorrow at 3. Now that it's official, what are your thoughts on the new head coach for the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, I thought the premise for hiring a new head coach for the Cowboys would be somebody with significant head coaching experience and experience in the NFL. I didn't want to, and I think I've told you this before, a head coach practitioner. I didn't want somebody coming and learning on my dime with what we kind of think is a pretty good roster still. So the fact that they were able to convince Mike McCarthy to take this job, I think fits what that blueprint was, and I think that was the Cowboys' blueprint also for finding a new head coach. I don't think they wanted to go through the college route if the guy didn't have some NFL experience. And I don't think they wanted to go through the route, Wes, of hiring a coordinator who didn't have head coaching experience. They didn't need somebody practicing to be a head coach. They needed a guy that had done this, had been successful, and truly had not been out of the game very long. And if you look at Mike McCarthy, he was out just 1 year, basically. And a lot of times, to me, when a successful head coach has been out 3, 5 years, sometimes I think they forget how hard you have to work. And I don't know what the motivation is coming back. So to me, I think this checked all the boxes the Cowboys were looking for with a head coach.
I don't know if you've had the chance to see any of the video from NFL Films or from NBC about the Mike McCarthy project that's been going on outside his house and his big barn there in Green Bay. But, you know, Mickey, it's almost like he wasn't out of coaching for a year. It seems like he was so involved this past year he became a better head coach.
It was almost like he kind of understood that he wasn't going to be out of the game very long, and he wanted to be prepared the best he could for an interview. And I would imagine that during interviews with him, I bet that he knocked their socks off because he was still in tune with the game. He was in tune with these teams. He's in tune with what the offenses and defenses are doing, and maybe what teams were doing against his team. You have more time to study it when you're out of the game, and I thought that was a brilliant move on his point to stay prepared. And you know, why does he want to come back and coach? I mean, I'm sure it's not for financial reason. He's just a football coach, and I think he expressed it in some of those interviews by saying, you know what, football's part of my family's life. So it wasn't him being selfish. He understood what the game of football and his job was to his kids, his wife. It was all a family affair. And to get back in it, I think has pleased everybody. I'm sure he ran it by the family, and I don't think he probably got the, Dad, what are you doing? We don't want to move, you know. So I just think from what was available, it was a good hire.
Do you think this was more of a case, and I'm talking about the interview process, of the Cowboys convincing him to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, or him convincing the Cowboys that he needed to be the head coach of the Cowboys?
Oh, I bet it's a two-way street, because remember, he had other interviews. And he even canceled, I think, one to come and take the interview with the Cowboys. And I've always said, Wes, when you're dealing with Jerry Jones, don't go in a room and shut the door if you don't intend to take the offer, because he'll convince you. He's the greatest salesman I think I've ever seen. And I've seen people that have gone in and he won't let them go until they say yes. And not just talking football, I'm talking business deals too. So he's a pretty good seller. But again, I think Mike McCarthy looked around and he goes, well, where else can I go? I've got a ready-made quarterback, a ready-made running back, an awfully good defensive line, and all I got to do basically is figure out how to fix this defense. And that's got to be one of his major goals now that he's the head coach.
What do you think Mike McCarthy means for Dak Prescott?
Oh, I think Dak's a pretty smart guy. I think he realizes that this was the head coach that groomed Aaron Rodgers. This was the head coach that took care of Brett Favre later in his career and had success with both guys. So I think he understands that as he developed this year, and he had no lack of help from guys like Kellen Moore and John Kitna, Jason Garrett, Doug Nussmeier. These guys were all quarterbacks. So he had some pretty good tutelage, especially this year, and I think that's why you saw him have the year he had. And I think now that Mike McCarthy's in charge, he probably can accentuate where Dak was this year. And again, to me, he was awfully good this year, especially when he didn't have a sprained AC joint in his shoulder.
Do you have a feel for what may be the next move for Kellen Moore?
I do not know. He's got options. It sounds like McCarthy would like to keep him along as the offensive coordinator, but I think that comes with an asterisk because Mike McCarthy, I think all but 1 year in Green Bay, called the plays. He was the offensive coordinator. Now, there's a lot of coaches out there, and Sean Payton for one. He's got an offensive coordinator, but he calls the plays on Sunday. If you think back to what Bill Parcells did, he had a run game coordinator, a pass game coordinator, but when it came to Sunday, he was the offensive coordinator. He called the plays. So I think what these coaches do is they let the offensive coordinator do the legwork during the week, come up with the scripts for practice, help develop the game plan, but then the head coach calls the plays. And that's certainly what happens in New Orleans and has been happening. So he also has the opportunity to go to the University of Washington and be the offensive coordinator. And in college, you will be the offensive coordinator and you will call the plays. And remember, the state of Washington, that's his home state. That's where he grew up. So I think it comes down to if he has these two opportunities, what's his future game plan? Does he want to be a coach in the NFL, or does he want to be a head coach maybe in college? And this would be a grooming process for him to continue calling plays and showing other schools that he does know what he's talking about.
What about Ezekiel Elliott? What do you think this hire, this offense will mean for Zeke?
Well, I think if you've watched closely when Mike McCarthy was with the Packers, he liked to run the football. And I think that this means that Zeke, don't worry about, they're not coming in with this, big offense that's just going to scatter the ball around throwing it. He understands the ability to run the football, and when they've had good running backs in Green Bay, he certainly took advantage of that. So I think we look at a guy like Mike McCarthy and you think Aaron Rodgers and all they do is throw the ball around, but I don't think that's the case. I think he understands how important it is to run the football, and especially when you're a coach in Green Bay, knowing what the weather can be like in November and December and January, running the football is an important part of the game for him.
Well, you can get involved. You can talk with Mickey by going to Twitter and using the hashtag AskMickey. Tracy Parton has a question for Mickey and writes, will the Cowboys stay with a 4-3 defense under the new defensive coordinator?
I would think they do. Mike Nolan has coached both in his career. I think he's awfully familiar with the 4-3. And if you look at the Cowboys' personnel, Wes, I don't think they have defensive ends on this team capable of playing a 3-4, and they certainly don't have enough linebackers, just at first blush. Now, we got to hear that from him, but I think the 4-3, and that's what, you know, for a lot of the years Mike McCarthy had at Green Bay. So we'll see where it goes, but I don't see, you know, usually when you run a 3-4 defense, those defensive ends are basically mobile defensive tackles, big guys that can hold down the line of scrimmage. And you got to have two pass rushing linebackers and two guys in the middle. And I don't know that the Cowboys at this point, not knowing what Sean Lee's going to do, not knowing how quickly Leighton Vander Esch comes back from his neck surgery, do you have two guys in the middle? Can DeMarcus Lawrence stand up as a outside linebacker in coverage? So those are some of the things. And remember, with Robert Quinn, the reason he got traded twice was because those teams went from a 4-3 defense to a 3-4, and they didn't think he could be that stand-up outside linebacker that can drop in coverage yet rush the quarterback.
Mickey, when you think back at the Mike McCarthy and the Green Bay days, what comes to mind for you?
Well, he's had a huge hand in what's happened with this Cowboys coaching staff. If you think about it, in 2010, when the Cowboys were sitting there at 1-6, his Packers beat the Cowboys badly in that 8th game of the season, and that was the last game for Wade Phillips, and Jason Garrett took over as the interim coach and then became the head coach. If you look at two of the more crushing losses the Cowboys have had in the playoffs, you go back to 2014 against the Packers up in Green Bay, and Mike McCarthy had the wits about him to throw the challenge flag on Dez's catch down to the 2-yard line, and as we know, that got reviewed and turned into a no catch, and they ended up winning the game. And then in 2016, when the Cowboys were a top seed at 13-3, their first game was against the Packers. And we know what happened there with the Packers after the Cowboys tied the game after they had fallen behind 31-31, left them less than a minute on the clock, and Aaron Rodgers completes the pass to Jared Cook with 3 seconds left and inbounds by about an inch, setting up Mason Crosby's 51-yard game-winning walk-off touchdown, or field goal, excuse me. And so if you think about it, had that been reversed, Jason Garrett would have been 4-2 in playoffs since 2014. Mike McCarthy, who was 4-3, would have ended up being 2-5. And so had the Cowboys won those games, you know, we might not be here talking about Mike McCarthy, because you would have said, well, Jason Garrett got this team to the NFC Finals 2 years in these last 5. So yeah, he's had a big hand in why he's coming here today.
I watched an interview earlier this afternoon with Mike McCarthy, and he was asked by Peter King what was his, you know, besides the Super Bowl win, what were his maybe 2 or most memorable games as a Packers, and he mentioned the 2016 game, but he also mentioned in 2016 with Matt Flynn as the backup quarterback starting against the Cowboys. They came in to AT&T Stadium and stole that game too, so it was very interesting that 2 of the games besides the Super Bowl that stood out to him were against the Cowboys.
So he kind of owes the Cowboys, right?
Yeah, he does. A little payback now for the fans. All right, what do you expect we hear tomorrow at 3 o'clock? And what do you want to hear from either McCarthy or Jerry Jones tomorrow at 3 o'clock?
Well, it'll be the first chance Jerry Jones has to explain why he moved on from Jason Garrett. I know he had a release and all that stuff, a statement, but now he's got to actually say it in front of, I don't know, they're probably set up for 50 to 100 media members to be here at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. And I bet he gets emotional. I mean, just think about it. The lengthy career Jason Garrett's had with the Cowboys, first as a as a player, and a backup quarterback. Sometimes he was the third guy, but towards the end he was the backup quarterback. He spent a year on the practice squad. He comes back and gives you 3.5 years as the offensive coordinator, along with interim head coach, and then these 9 seasons as the head coach. And think about this also. So when his dad was a scout for the NFL, you know, he was sort of in that Cowboys family before Jerry ever got here. And remember, his 2 brothers were coaches for the Cowboys. So this has been a long-time family affair with the Garrett family. And my guess is if Jerry talks about it enough, he's going to get pretty emotional. And then I think he'll kind of explain why they went to Mike McCarthy. And then McCarthy's going to have to answer, I think, a lot of tough questions, because he's going to get asked, how are you going to get along with Jerry Jones? And, you know, do you understand what you're walking into? And he's going to answer questions about staff. Who are you keeping? Who do you want to keep? Where are you going forward from this? Do you have guys already lined up? So I think Mike, and I'm sure he'll get, you know, basically prepared for these types of questions that are sure to come his way. And I'm sure somebody's going to ask him about the end at Green Bay and how it ended 4 games before the end of the 2018 season, his relationship with Aaron Rodgers. If there was indeed a problem, it was much publicized. Sometimes when there's smoke, there's fire, but other times maybe things get a tad exaggerated. So I think it'll be a very interesting press conference at 3 o'clock.
Fantastic job as always, Mickey. Thank you for your time today in our special edition of the Silver Star Nation Interactive. We will talk to you soon. That will do it for now. Have a great week, everybody, and much more right here on all your Next Star Nation stations as we continue to follow the Cowboys in tomorrow's press conference with Mike McCarthy. Have a great day, everybody.